I meant the trust that you wrote on top of interest income.
Oh, this word trust. Okay, I'll be going over this. Just bear with me. I'll be going over it all in a jiffy. All right. First thing, I want to open up the lesson, folk, where I left off with. Well, this chapter is about the Gilded Age. This period of time called the Gilded Age. When I was in high school, they told us that we ought to look back on this period of time with a sense of shame, that this was a time of greed, an era of good stealing. They call Rutherford B. Hayes Rutherford B. Hayes and his administration the era of good stealing. The presidents of this period, I'm talking about the presidents beginning with Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, from the 1877 to about 1901, the presidents did not do what they should have done, even though they did not know that they should have done it. I mean, we're judging these men by standards of a generation later. Nevertheless, the presidents should have regulated the big business, should have kept the big business interests from gobbling up the small. But this was a time when the big business gobbled up the small, and you had super large corporations called trust. Now, a trust is the same thing as a monopoly. Have any of you ever played a game called Monopoly? Been popular since the 1930s, and one of those 1930s board games that is still played regularly. And all right, now, if any of you know different, you're welcome to say so, but if you are playing Monopoly on a board, if you can get control of the railroads, you can win. If any of it,
hands down.
huh?
Hands down.
Yeah, if you can get the railroads, you'll win the game. Yes, hands down. Yes, okay. All right. Very important that you know. Anyway, monopoly is where there's only one company that controls everything. Now, if you cross the Rio Grande River and go to Mexico, they have an oil monopoly called Pemex. And Pemex is the only gasoline company they allow. That means that Pemex can put out as crummy a product as they want to put out. You have to buy it anyway. It also means that they can charge any price they want to. When there's competition, if one side charges too much, the customers will go to another side. If one car company puts out a crummy car, customers will go buy another kind of car. Whereas if there's a monopoly, you've got to take whatever is put out or do without. So competition, now competition, folk, is really tough. It means somebody's going to lose. It means businesses are going to go out of business. I mean, it's a tough world we're living in. But monopolies, hey, it gives a certain kind of security, at least for the people who are employed in them. But it also means that they can be as lazy as they want to be and put out as crummy of products. They want to be in charge any price they want to charge. But have competition. You've got to watch what price you charge. You've got to watch what kind of product you put out. But anyway, the Gilded Age was an age of business. Trust, where that one corporation owned it all. I mean, probably one corporation, fine. Now, there were three big wheels in this game. Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan. I mentioned these two last time. Carnegie was in steel, Rockefeller in oil, Morgan in banking or finance. Now, eventually the federal government stepped in and broke up these big trusts. But they used Charles Darwin as their justification. It is called social Darwinism. In other words, this is the way nature is. Now, folks, what I'm about to say is not what I believe. So don't quote me on this unless you quote me in context. The way nature is the strong gobble up the weak. And that's the way we ought to do things, because that's the natural order of things. So, Andrew Carnegie knew that he could get ahead if he were only allowed to put his competitors out of business. But no church he knew of justified it. Then one day he read Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin for his theory of evolution. And he said, this is it. This is what I need to justify what I want to do. and he proceeded to set up a steel business and then drive almost all of his competitors out of business by undercutting them. He got the railroads on it. He needed the railroads, but he got the railroads on his side by getting the railroads to give him rebates. In other words, the railroads would charge him a much lower price than they would his competitors. This meant he could put his product on the market cheaper than everybody else, and he put other companies out of business. Now, John D. Rockefeller did the same thing with oil. He'd set up a gasoline station in a town where there already was a gas station, but because he had all these other thousands of gas stations all over the country, he could set up a gas station in a town and then underprice that station, to keep underpricing the station till he put the other guy out of business. Then once the other guy was put out of business, he could jack up the price and charge any old price he wanted to. Usually much higher than what the people had been paying before. And he felt fully morally justified in doing this. J.P. Morgan did a lot of the same thing with finance, handling money, banking. Now, I want to say this about Charles Darwin: survival of the fittest. That's what he believed. Now, on the surface, it may sound logical. But, now I want to use the rabbit as an example. Any rabbit that is born today, or has only one chance in 10 of surviving for 1 year. But now what if a rabbit, all right, let's say the average rabbit has 0.1 chance, or 1/10 of a chance surviving 1 year. Supposing one rabbit is more fit than the others, the fittest rabbit. The fittest rabbit has only this much of a chance of surviving 1 year. In other words, just a slight bit better than average. The ones that are less fit might have a 0.09 chance. In other words, a little bit less of a chance. Now, the point I'm trying to make is the fittest do not necessarily, now, the unfit don't survive. A rabbit that's born with only 3 legs, or a rabbit that's born without fur, or something like that, those unfit rabbits do not survive. But the fittest have only a slightly better chance of surviving than the unfit. If a rabbit meets a fox or a wolf, even if he's this rabbit here, he has just a slight bit chance of surviving. So the point I'm making is, each generation of rabbits is just as fit as the one before. They don't get better and better and better. Darwin tried to tell us that only these would survive, and then they would in turn have better rabbits. And rabbits, as time went on, would get better and better and better and better and faster and faster and faster and more fit. This is not the way it is, folk. The fit. Now, I'm no way, well, when I get here early, I come from Powder Spring, I saw a squirrel outside. And I think, yeah, I'll use this as an example. Every squirrel you see in the wild looks just like every other squirrel. That is what natural selection does for the wildlife. Only, all right, but now if you go to a pet store, you'll see brown squirrels, squirrels that are part white, brown, and gray. And you ever been to a pet store and seen them? Yeah, yes. Well, those kind of squirrels, I mean, what happens to them in the wild? They have no chance at all. They only, and this is natural selection for you, one type of squirrel actually survives to adulthood. The rest of them do not. That is what natural selection does. It greatly narrows the gene pool. It does not widen the gene pool. Yes?
I know it sounds crazy to say that, because when I moved here from New York, I have yet to see an all-black squirrel up north. There's plenty.
There are a few in Georgia, yes.
I've never seen them.
Yeah, there are a few here in Georgia, all black. But even that variety of squirrels,
theory, though.
they always remain, only the all black ones survive.
Yeah. It's like,
Yeah, but I mean, you can go to Colorado and the squirrels look just like the ones through here. You go to Washington, D.C., and they look like the ones you see here. But Georgia does, and Florida have a few all black squirrels. Yes, but now, what I have here, folk, I use this illustration. This is my daughter's set of bridge cards. Now, this might not look like many bridge cards you've seen. This is some Disney bridge cards. They're very difficult to mark. They're very difficult to bend. Therefore, cheating is somewhat difficult. Now, I'm going to pick one up at random. I don't know what I'm picking out. Oh, this is one of the worst cards I could pick up. This is the 3 of diamonds. This card will seldom win a hand, even though it will win a hand if diamonds happen to be trump. You can still win a hand with it. But nevertheless, this is a real bridge card. There are rules by which this card can be played. All right, now, I'll get back to this in a minute. Ken Ham is as anti-evolution as they come, yet he believes that your lion and your tiger and your bobcat and your domestic kitty cat, house cat, all came from the same ancestry. We all know probably your dog, your wolf, your fox, your coyote, and your dingo all had the same ancestors. So therefore, if I admit that wolves can become dogs, wolves can possibly become coyotes, or the same ancestor of those that could produce those varieties, is that not admitting to evolution? No. DNA guarantees two things. Well, sexual reproduction guarantees differentiation. In other words, there'll be, and even brothers and sisters, I mean, they have the same parents. The brother, sister, even, or one brother will be different from another brother, unless they're identical twins. That's differentiation, but it sets limits. In other words, a cat cannot become a dog. Felines always remain felines. Canines always remain canines. Equines always remain equines. Evolution occurs not when you pull out a 3 this time, now I'm going to pull out another one. I don't know what it is. All right, here's an 8 of hearts. That's simply drawing a hand, and each of us have drawn from a gene pool. Now, when I went to my class reunion back about 18 months ago, September, 50-year reunion, our class president had shot herself dead. I said to one of my fellow classmates, I said, this woman drew a better hand than the rest of us, but she didn't play it. I mean, she was good looking, she was popular, she was the president of the class, but got out in the world, and the qualities that made her so great in high school did not help her much in the real life. She couldn't cope with being just an ordinary woman. And she fell to drinking and let her weight get up, fell to drug use and couldn't live with herself, and finally took her own life. Now, what is evolution? It's not a matter of drawing a hand. Every one of us draws a hand, genetic DNA hand. Evolution occurs when I pull out from these cards, bridge cards, a 1954 Mickey Mantle baseball card from a deck of bridge cards. That, folk, and also all of a sudden rules evolve as to how such a card is to be played. Now, if you were to stick a 1954 Mickey Mantle baseball card here, there's no rules which could be played. But in other words, every thing that's in every gadget is invented by certain parts and has a process. What are the processes? The processes for living things, it's got to grow, it's got to reproduce, it's got to ingest food, it's got to excrete waste, it's got to respirate, it's got to be able to move. This is true from one cell all the way up. I'm throwing a lot at you at once. Now, how could the molecules, the carbon molecules in this room come together and form a 1954 Mickey Mantle baseball card? Now, I say this because hopefully all of you know that the carbon molecules in this room would help form if there were a plant in this room, given that plant had light, that plant would grow as a result of picking up carbon dioxide in the air and using it to build its leaves and build itself. Any of you know what I'm talking about? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Carbon dioxide. Well, why can't the carbon dioxide just get together and form a baseball card? There is a better chance of that happening than there is of one cell coming together by itself, folk. Now, for the first cell to have come together, instantly, all of the atoms, like more than a billion of them, 40 billion atoms would have to come together all at once at the right place. That's not enough. Then the processes have to start immediately. What if the processes didn't start? Your cell would decompose. The processes is what keeps that cell from decomposing. Charles Darwin, with all respect, to his 1859 microscopes. Now, here. This is an 1859 microscope looking at a human cell and a white rabbit cell. White rabbit with pink eyes, an albino. To him, they looked alike. They had a cell, they had a cell wall, and a bunch of jelly-like something called protoplasm, jelly-like called protoplasm. So he assumed this, a little bit of evidence showed that human beings and white rabbits with pink eyes were a lot alike. Well, maybe they are a lot alike, but with our better microscopes today, we know that he was very badly wrong. This one will grow up, become a human. This will grow up, become a white rabbit with pink eyes. This one will not grow up, become a white rabbit with pink eyes, and this will not grow up, become a human. Owing to this DNA, which Charles Darwin did not know existed. All right, now I'll pause here. Anybody have any questions? If you haven't guessed, folk, these people were using, and let me tell you something. John D. Rockefeller was a very religious man, a devout churchgoer. But he believed that Charles Darwin justified what he did. Now, we're going to talk more about this when we come to the chapter on that has the Scopes trial that occurred in Dayton, Tennessee, several miles north of here. Everything that Charles Darwin said about evolution has proven to be wrong. And yet he is put into high school and college textbooks as though it were a proven fact. Now, back in 1960, they told us evolution was fact. It was proven. Now, I want to ask you again, folks. When does a matter of science become so proven that you never question it anymore? You all should know the answer to that.
It never does.
Never does. Never. The last 50 years have not at all been kind to the theory of evolution. A group of scientists, creationists, have come up and they have raised questions that simply the evolutionists cannot answer. And today, very few evolutionists will look you in the face and tell you that evolution is a proven fact. In fact, when Ken Ham and Bill Nye debated back in 2014, 5 years or so ago, they agreed to not discuss evolution. The evolutionists and creation used to debate. There's no debates going on today owing to the fact that evolutionists will not show up. DNA has pretty much set the death knell to evolution. I'll talk about something getting better. The best racehorse ever raced was a horse named Secretariat back in 1973, I believe. Secretariat, though, his grandfather had won the Triple Crown, so he had the right genes. But he had something given to him that was not even part of he had a 50-pound heart. What this means is that he could keep on running and running, and his body would supply him with oxygen. He had large lungs. This was not inherited. He was the father of some 500 horses, only one or two from ever won a race. The point I'm making is, any member of us can get to an edge, but then their descendants will bounce back to the mainstream. How many of you are familiar with a guppy? It's a type of fish that's sold in pet stores. The guppy, yeah, the guppy. The guppies that you see at pet stores are really descended from a gray, ugly South American creek fish. Just gray and ugly. But you can selectively breed them to get these nice fancy guppies. And guess what? If you put them in your tank and let them breed randomly, they'll revert back to the gray, ugly guppy from the South American creek. They hit a wall like and bounce back toward the center. Yes?
So going back to the horse, because I was always a fan of Secretariat. So that's why
he had a good genetic content. I mean, I don't doubt that the genes had, but he had two things going for him that was not inherited, and he could not pass on: his huge heart and his huge lung capacity.
So that's why it would want to it had the innate.
He's a horse that will only come along like maybe once in 100 years. Yeah. The right genes plus a little bit of a gift, it's not genetic.
Okay.
Yeah. But again, his descendants, average Joe horses.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And it was.
So he did not evolve into a better specimen of horse. In other words, there are limits. Now, the Spartans believed that they were the best, and they would only marry other Spartans because they did not want to mix their blood. They didn't know what they called it blood. If I could go back to Sparta, I would advise them, hey, if you really want to create a race of super warriors, send some of your men to Africa to collect African women. Send others of them to India to collect Indian women. Send others of them to China to collect a few Chinese women. And send your women off to Spain or to Scandinavia to collect some of the men there. Because by continually inbreeding, all you're going to do is create a race, an ethnic group of inferior peoples, which is exactly what happened to them.
Yeah, I don't think they seen the evidence of it when they started discarding. They thought it was just something wrong with that line of person. It was
But
discarding.
actually, they kept inbreeding. It had been among themselves. And now, again, folks, I hope nobody accuse me of racism, but one reason that most of your professional basketball and football players are black is because black people's ancestry is more diverse than the ancestry of most white folk. Again, hopefully no one will take offense if you say that. Of course, now, folk, now that's not that we should, but we do. We consider a person black if only one of their parents is black. Now, again, this is just simply a fact of life. It's not that we should, but a lot of, for instance, Barack Obama had a white mother. This is, again, medical fact. But the point I'm making is to get a better race of people, the Spartans should have diversified their DNA. Instead, they kept mixing in the same genetic gene pool, and the result was a bunch of recessive genes came into the pool, and more recessive genes, and more recessive genes. That's why inbreeding is always a bad idea, because it produces offspring that have all kinds of physical and mental issues. All right, so much for Darwin. Now, I spent a lot of time on this, but again, I think it's important. I must say this. Charles Darwin was used by Adolf Hitler to justify the killing of Jews and gypsies and anyone who we considered undesirable. He used Charles Darwin as justification. And I've mentioned already, he sterilized every black man he could to keep that genetic trait from going down any farther. All right. Now, the railroads were the first of the big businesses. The railroads became quite corrupt. So the Interstate Commerce Commission was set up. It was the first federal bureaucracy set up to regulate a business. And today the ICC not only regulates the railroads, but regulates truckers. Now they don't regulate the air. The airplanes were special, so they had to have a special air patrol to regulate aircraft when aircraft came along. But the ICC regulates truckers, and today the ICC can actually control. One of my brothers serves as a truck driver some years back, and your bosses know everywhere that your truck goes. And they allow you, for instance, if you have a friend who lives 50 miles, you're allowed to go up to 50 miles out of your way to visit him. But they know if you're working too hard. In other words, if you work more than 8 hours a day, they'll fine you. The ICC today knows when you stop and rest, when you sleep. They know, like Sam, they know when you're sleeping, they know when you're awake, they know when you've been bad or good, so be good for goodness sake. Yes. Oh, yes. But the ICC, they can follow you around today. And if you try to work 7 days a week, they'll fine you. You've got to take at least 1 day off. And you can't work more than 8 hours a day, or try to drive more than 8 hours a day. Again, the reason for that is obvious. It's so easy to fall asleep behind a wheel, and many a person have died or killed other people falling asleep behind the wheel. The ICC, Interstate Commerce, tries to regulate the rail industry and the trucking industry and other forms of traffic between states. Now, today we have other regulators, among them the CAP, Civil Air Patrol, and the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. And being an amateur radio or a ham operator, I'm very familiar with the FCC. The FCC has an office down here in Atlanta, and I passed most of their tests, and I have both an an amateur radio license and a commercial radio license. I've not used the commercial license much, but I use the amateur license quite regularly. I'm active on a ham band. But again, it's all controlled by the Federal Communications Commission to make sure that, all right, if you know anything about radio, a person with a bad transmitter can cause a whole lot of interference. So make sure that you stay on your frequency and your transmitter is only operating on the frequency that you're assigned to and not interfering with commercial radio or interfering with ship to shore or aircraft to ground radio. These frequencies have to be kept clear so the people who need them can use them. The opening vignette had to do with Mark Twain, the author of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. We talked about them last week. Now, along about this time, there were some inventors. A lot of inventors came along. Now, before we proceed, I want to say this about inventors. Today's inventions are mostly made by corporations. But just within the last week, a great inventor died, who was invented in our lifetime. The man who invented the handheld calculator. Most of you probably don't use handheld calculators anymore. The handheld calculator is included on every cell phone. And the handheld calculator is also included on every computer. But anyway, he actually got a patent on it in 1969. I was unaware of it. In 1969, I turned 20 years old. I was unaware. But he actually put them out, and I first saw my first one in 1974. And I thought, someday I'll figure out how this works. So I got the back off of one, took it apart, and looked at it. I couldn't tell anything. All you see is a bunch of triangular chips. Later on, I learned basically how they worked when I started studying electronics. I won't try to explain it here, but it's basically a matter of Boolean algebra, digital, ones and zeros. Anybody know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like binary.
Binary, yeah, binary, Boolean algebra. Converting binary to hexadecimal, in other words, to base 10, base 2 to base 10, etc., and etc. And they do everything by adding. So if you say 8, if you want to subtract 3 from 8, it's actually 8 plus minus 3. Any of you follow what I'm... You're all, okay, you're all, that's okay, I don't worry about it. You don't have to know how they work. But I did eventually learn something about them. But anyway, he was an inventor who invented something, but most of the inventions today, for instance, the microprocessor used in our cell phones and our computers was invented by corporations. Most of the inventions that are invented today are invented by teams of people. And a person might be on the team for a while and then leave, another person take his place, and ultimately the corporation that invented it gets the credit. But in those days, there were some of the main inventors. Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone. By the way, this is a G. Alexander G. Bell. I used to think he was named after the phone because the old-fashioned telephones had a bell in them, and they would ring like, when somebody called you a number, they would ring like a bell. But actually, the bell was a coincidence. Alexander Graham Bell. Now, something I want to say about this invention, 70 men fought over who invented it first. But none of them had actual documentation to show it, except for Bell. Bell had a piece of paper that showed the date and the time when he communicated with a friend downstairs, and the two of them heard each other. Because of this, he was able to win his case in court. But when the technology was right, 70 men put a telephone together at one time. But Bell's claim was the one that was upheld by the courts. Now, Thomas Edison made 1,000 patents. The most famous of his inventions were the light bulb, but since then we've learned that Joseph Swan also put a light bulb together in Europe. His light bulb only lasted about 40 hours. He tried different materials. Eventually learned that to get the light bulb to last, you had to pump all the air out of it. Then you had to use a certain right kind of material, and eventually, even after he died, the light bulbs got better and better and better. But those old light bulbs were prone to burn out. Now eventually the halogen bulb was invented, the mercury vapor lamp was invented, and today the world is fast going towards LEDs, and I'm using them myself. an LED bulb will burn up 3 watts and put out the equivalent of 60 watts with the old Edison bulbs. But the LED is fast taking over. But Edison had multiple inventions. He also he improved on the telephone and the telegraph. He invented the record